Today, I'm talking about the Blazar Remus 50mm T2 lens, and I'm using it right now on my Sony FX3. As I talk about this lens, so you can get the most time seeing this lens. I'll obviously be overlaying other shots with it that I've been shooting over the last few weeks as I've really been trying to get a feel for this lens in a wide variety of scenarios. This video is not sponsored. I have no relationship with Blazar. I'm coming from the perspective of a solo videographer slash filmmaker, and I never have a crew. It's very rare. Maybe I'll have like one person assisting me. In a very rare case too, but most of the time it's just me and the actors or the models. And so that's the perspective that I'm looking at this lens from. And I'm also primarily looking at it from the perspective of a short film and creative video sort of perspective. I'm not really looking at it from a commercial or event perspective, but primarily I've been testing this lens in creative shoot and kind of short vignette style of shooting, because that's basically how I want to use this lens. I'm not looking, to use this lens in a commercial or corporate setting or shoot weddings with it. Sphericals are going to do much better in those aspects unless somebody really wants the anamorphic look. This lens, compared to a lot of the lenses that I use, is a little bit heavier. It is a little bit chunkier, especially when you add an adapter. It's much smaller and lighter than other anamorphics. I'd equate it a lot more to something like the Sigma Art 50mm like I've got here. It's not crazy heavy, but it's also not super light if you're running around with it on your camera body for a long time. Currently, I'm using it mainly on a shoulder rig, partly to kind of help with the weight and the balance. And it's the best way right now with the setup that I have to mount a follow focus, and I will use the follow focus to control the focus rather than trying to twist the barrel, because it is a little bit on the stiffer side, which I like. But once you attach the follow focus, it's really smooth. Let's jump into the image, the way even a perfectly clean image looks, and maybe you can even tell and see something just a little bit special. I think people call it the 3D pop. Definitely does exist with this lens, and I really like that. Now, when it comes to the flares on this lens, that's kind of interesting because they're not something that pops up all the time. I've seen a lot of video of like the Sureis, and they flare so easily. If there's a light in the shot anywhere, that thing's gonna flare. But the Remus is not like that. It doesn't always flare if there is just a light in the shot. It has to be a pretty strong pointed light source hitting the lens at just the right angle. A lot of people hate the cell phone test, but we're gonna do the cell phone test just to kind of see what is going on. This is a very small light here. But, even if we still have the flashlight on, but we're showing it off to the side, we are not getting the flare too much in the lens. It comes a little bit, but it is pretty easily controlled. In the sunlight, there is that weird rainbow flare that'll show on the screen, and I will say it's more frequent than I'd like. It only is kind of at certain angles, but it's something to be aware of. If you like that flare, embrace that flare. It's personally not a flare that I really like, so I typically try and avoid it unless, I'm shooting like test shots, or maybe there's a specific shot where it does work, but I don't want my films to be full of those really, really egregious, crazy rainbow flares. There also can be a fair amount of halation and ghosting in direct sunlight with this guy. Again, you might be able to curb some of that with a matte box. Most of the time, those kind of artifacts I like, and I'm typically shooting in a way where I want that. If I'm getting that, I'm aiming it towards the sun, knowing that I'm going to get that kind of look. So, of course, the next thing that we all hear about is the sharpness. I have not compared this to, other anamorphics. I have not compared this to other Blazar Remus lenses or the Katos or anything like that. This is the only anamorphic lens that I have. So my frame of reference is spherical lenses, everything from the Sigma Arts that are razor sharp to, the Tamron 28 to 75 that's pretty decently sharp, but it's nothing, to write home about, but it's kind of a look that I like. And I feel like this lens, 2.8 to 4, is kind of the range that I'll use it in the most. And in that range, it's plenty sharp for video. It's not a lens, that if for some reason I wanted to do anamorphic photography, I don't know that there would be enough there. But certainly for anamorphic video, there is, absolutely. It looks great. I don't like an overly sharp video lens because there's just too much going on with the skin texture and stuff that you don't want to see, too much detail. I like a lens that is sharp, but not overly sharp. And I feel like the 50 millimeter, at least the copy that I got, really, really hits that. Right now, I am shooting at T2.8, and this is what you're going to get. I have shot at T2, and I think it's still usable, but I like T2.8 a lot better. And I feel like with how blurry the background is, with kind of the anamorphic look to the bokeh, that 2.8 is great. And, again, most of my lenses are 2.8. I have the f1.4 lenses, but T2.8 is pretty great and looks fantastic on this. And again, most of the stuff that I've shot, most of the examples that you'll see are T2.8, especially, if I'm doing something narrative, it's going to be between T2.8 and T4 because I want there to be a sense of what the background is. I don't want it to just, be blown out to hell. I wouldn't want a T1.4 anamorphic lens. That would just be too crazy. Even like I'm not that far from this background. Like I can, boop Grogu's nose there and he is pretty blown out. I can easily touch this little plant here and it is quite blurry. There's a lot of great separation going on. So there's plenty. Like at T2.8, there is plenty of background blur, plenty of separation. I think that the way the fall off is for the separation is really, really nice. Honestly, even T4, there's plenty. I feel like if I was shooting something like really narrative, I would probably lean for a lot of shots for T4 because you can see more of the background, you get a better sense of what the space is, it's not quite so crazy. Obviously, that would depend on the lighting. If it's super low light, then I might, do T2.8 or something like that. But for most, outdoor, normal lit stuff where, I can bring in lights and whatnot, or, shooting on the Sony FX3, can hit that ISO to 12,800, shoot at T4, it's going to look good. So if we're talking kind of head kind of stuff, absolutely T2.8 for a lot of maybe model type videos, those more creative portrait style videos or boudoir or something like that. T2.8 might be more the direction I want to go because I really want the focus to be on the model, not on the background necessarily. All that ramble to say, this lens has plenty of sharpness for video, for filmmaking especially, because it's really going to give you that pleasing amount of sharpness without being overly sharp and feeling too digital, which I really like. Like this lens does not need a Pro Mist filter like I'd put on pretty much all of my spherical lenses to try and take that edge off. This really takes care of that by itself. I have not felt a need or a desire to put on a Pro Mist filter. Really, the only time I might is if I really am pushing a dream effect or something like that. But most of the time, it's not necessary. And that does bring us to the background blur, which you can obviously see here, but I'm going to show some more examples. And generally, I would say it's quite pleasing. It looks good. I'm a huge fan of the Helios 44-2 kind of look, where you have the swirly bokeh around and whatnot. And this lens has some of that. I would say that the Helios maybe pushes that a little bit further if that's like a look that you really love and you're wondering, will this be the exact same? It won't be the exact same, no. It is quite pleasing. It is very evocative of anamorphic. It's not obviously as much as if you got a 2x anamorphic lens, but it's a lot better than what I've seen from the 1.33 times anamorphic lenses like from Sirui. I haven't seen enough from the Blazar Apex to know if they're going to compete or not, but this has a nice amount of stretch. Like it feels anamorphic enough that my anamorphic itch is satisfied. It feels still really cool to shoot on this, particularly because I'm shooting on the Sony FX3, which is something that I do want to address here. Any camera that only shoots in 16:9, you're going to want either a 1.33 times squeeze or a 1.5 times squeeze, because a 2 times squeeze it's just going to be way too long and thin and stretched, and you're going to have to crop off way too much of the image. Now, even with the 1.5 times squeeze lens on the Sony FX3, I am cropping off just a little bit of the edges of the frame. I'll go ahead here and, zoom out to show you what the full width is and how much you're actually, losing here with cropping. But personally, I think this really serves the image for the kind of image that I like. Because when you get to the very edges of the Blazar Remus lenses, as I'm sure that you have seen, there gets to be a lot of weird distortion and your subjects kind of squish and get super, super skinny. And it can look really, really strange if you're panning or if your subjects are going to the very edge of your frame. I don't know if you'll be able to see it here. Yeah, you can kind of see how my hand gets skinny. But I definitely have noticed it a little bit, particularly in like group shots, crowd shots, things like that. The edges will be just a little bit squeezed. And when you crop off just that little bit, I think I lose like 12% of the edges, like 6% on each side. And depending on who you are, you're either going to love that or that's going to annoy you. Personally, most of the time I really like it. I like character in my lenses, but it does get just a little bit crazy for me on the edges of the Remus sometimes, because it can really squish down your characters, your actor, your model. If they go too far to the edge of the frame, their face starts to, squish in there like that. And, if they come in from out of frame on the very, very edge, walk into frame, like they'll start super skinny and then get normal towards the middle of the frame. And that little crop takes out a lot of that. So most of the time it's really not noticeable when you see somebody walk into frame. Like there might be a little bit of change, a little bit of distortion, but it's not the crazy amount that you see on the very edges. So, most of the time I don't even notice it, which is fantastic for me because I don't ever want the lens to be distracting from my story. I want the lens to serve and enhance the story. And so I really like kind of how the Remus works on a 16:9 sensor like the FX3. Now, obviously, if you were using this on a Super 35 sensor, like the FX30 or something like that, you're going to be much more punched into the sensor and not have any distortion on the sides. And I like a little bit of distortion. I like a little bit kind of how it, softens out here on the edges and kind of some of that character that you can really see, when you get outside, when you get, into the forest or on a busy street or something like that, when you're shooting, at f2.8 or something like that. There's a lot of interesting character there. But I do not mind chopping off just a little bit of the craziest parts of the character. And, if you're somebody who doesn't want to crop that off, there's a lot of options. The Blackmagic Pixus is insanely popular right now. I feel like, I might just be in a YouTube rabbit hole with my algorithm, but I feel like everybody's making videos on the Pixus. Now, if Sony ever decided to unlock OpenGate, through firmware or something like that, I'd be excited to try it out. Oh, for sure. But it's not something where I feel like I'm lacking or like I'm losing what I like about this lens. And obviously, you can judge for yourself. There's plenty of videos out there showing this on the Pixis, showing this on various reds, showing it on all sorts of different things. My perspective comes from using it on the Sony FX3 and kind of my observations with that. So that's really all I wanted to say in this particular video. For now, that's it. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I will catch you in the next video.